The five most powerful empires in the galaxy had been killing each other for thousands of years. They fought over planets, over trade routes, over insults that nobody even remembered anymore. The Valarith Dominion, a race of tall reptilian warriors, believed they were born to rule. The Shanri Collective, billions of insectoid minds linked together into one giant hive, watched everything with cold patience. The Dracul Hegemony, ancient creatures that looked like massive armored squids, had built their entire civilization on war. The Thyrene Ascendancy could read minds and move objects with thought alone, and they believed this made them better than everyone else. And then there were the Urvani, amphibian traders who cared about nothing except profit. These five empires hated each other, but they hated the idea of total war even more, because total war meant total destruction. So every few decades, they would meet at a neutral space station called the Fulcrum, floating in the one patch of space where all five borders touched. They called it the Contested Veil. They would sit across from each other, bare their teeth, and pretend to negotiate peace while their warships floated outside like hungry wolves. Today was one of those days. The station was full of diplomats and generals and spies. Hundreds of warships from all five empires surrounded the Fulcrum in neat formations, each one watching the others. Inside the main hall, delegates argued about borders and mining rights and old grudges. It was the same conversation they had been having for centuries. Nothing ever changed. And then everything changed. It started with a sound. Every sensor on every ship, every scanner on the Fulcrum, every piece of detection equipment in the entire region began screaming at the same time. Warning lights flooded every bridge. Alarms echoed through every corridor. Something was happening in the center of the Contested Veil, and nobody knew what it was. The diplomats stopped talking. The generals grabbed their communicators. Every eye turned to the viewport. Space itself was tearing open. It was not a warp gate. Every species in the galaxy used warp gates, and they all looked the same. A bright ring of energy that ships flew through. This was nothing like that. This was a wound in reality, a jagged rip in the blackness of space that glowed with a color nobody could name. It was not on any spectrum any of them had ever measured. It pulsed like a heartbeat, and from inside the wound, something came through. It was a ship, but calling it a ship felt wrong, the same way calling an ocean a puddle felt wrong. It was enormous. The Dracul Hegemony had the biggest warships in the galaxy, dreadnoughts that were 3 kilometers long and bristled with weapons. This thing made them look like toys. It was easily 10 kilometers from bow to stern, and its shape was unlike anything anyone had ever built. It had no sharp angles, no obvious weapons, no engine nacelles. Its hull was matte black, so dark it seemed to eat the light around it. Strange geometric patterns covered its surface, and they moved. They shifted and rearranged themselves like living things, like the ship was breathing. Every database in every fleet searched for a match. Every archive, every record, every intelligence file going back 10,000 years was scanned in seconds. Nothing. 0 matches. The ship did not exist in any record anywhere in the known galaxy. It broadcast no identification signal. It sent no message. It simply drifted forward, slow and silent, and came to a stop in the exact center of the Contested Veil, equal distance from every fleet. Fear spread through the region like poison in water. Admiral Tovan of the Valarith Dominion was not a patient creature. He was 7 feet tall, covered in dark green scales, and had risen to his rank by being the most aggressive officer in the most aggressive navy in the galaxy. He did not like things he could not understand, and he did not like being afraid. So he did what he always did when he felt afraid. He attacked. He ordered a patrol wing of 12 fast cruisers to intercept the unknown ship. They flew toward it in a tight formation, weapons hot, and broadcast a demand on all frequencies. Identify yourself. State your origin. Power down your systems. You have 30 seconds to comply. The unknown ship said nothing. Tovan's jaw tightened. He gave the order. One of his cruisers fired a warning shot, a bright blue plasma bolt aimed just ahead of the unknown ship's bow. It was a standard intimidation tactic. The bolt would pass close enough to shake them, to let them know the Valarith meant business. The bolt never arrived. About 500 meters from the unknown ship's hull, the plasma bolt simply stopped existing. It did not explode. It did not scatter. It was there, and then it was not, as if the ship had simply decided that the bolt was not welcome and erased it from reality. Tovan's bridge went silent. His weapons officer looked at him with wide eyes. His tactical display showed no shield signature, no deflection field, no countermeasure of any kind. The bolt had just vanished. Before Torvan could give another order, every communication system on the fulcrum received a transmission. It was tight beam, precise, and crystal clear. The voice spoke in Galactic Common, the shared trade language that every species used. The pronunciation was perfect. The grammar was flawless. But the voice pattern matched no known species. It was smooth and calm and carried an authority that made even the oldest delegates in the room sit up straighter. This is the UN Erebus, representing the United Earth Navy. We are here to observe. We recommend you do not fire again. The words hung in the air. Every delegate in the hall looked at each other. The Valarith looked at the Dracul. The Thyrene looked at the Shanri. The Orvani looked at everyone. United Earth Navy, Earth, humans. Nobody had ever heard any of those words before. No database contained them. No star map showed a planet called Earth. No intelligence agency had ever filed a single report about a species called humans. In a galaxy that had been explored and mapped and fought over for 10,000 years, an entire civilization had just appeared from nowhere. And they had a ship that could erase weapons fire from existence. The main hall of the fulcrum, which had been filled with the noise of 5 empires arguing moments ago, was now completely silent. For the first time in recorded history, every empire in the galaxy shared the same emotion at the same time. It was not anger. It was not curiosity. It was not even surprise. It was fear. And somewhere aboard the massive black ship that floated in the darkness outside, someone was watching them all, waiting patiently and saying nothing more. The fear lasted about 6 hours. After that, politics took over. Because in the world of galactic empires, even terror was just another tool to be used. Every empire wanted to be the first to figure out the humans. Every empire wanted to control the story. And every empire, deep down, was already thinking about how to take that enormous black ship and its impossible technology for themselves. The Thyrene Ascendancy moved first. They were proud of their psionic abilities. For thousands of years, they had been reading the minds of other species, bending thoughts, breaking wills. No mind in the galaxy could resist a trained Tyrene telepath. So they sent their best. Mindlord Viss was the most powerful psionic being alive. She had cracked open the mental defenses of enemy generals. She had read the secret thoughts of kings from across a room. She sat in her quarters aboard the fulcrum, closed her 4 pale eyes, and reached her mind across the void toward the Erebus. She found the ship easily enough. It was like a bonfire in a dark field, impossible to miss. She pushed closer, searching for individual minds inside, expecting to find the usual patterns. Every species she had ever scanned had a certain order to their thoughts. Clean, structured, predictable. What she found inside the Erebus was none of those things. There were roughly 10,000 minds aboard that ship, and every single one of them was a storm. Emotions crashed into each other like waves in a hurricane. Rage sat next to love. Grief tangled with joy. Fear danced with courage. And all of it was happening at the same time, in every mind, all at once. It was not chaos. It was something worse. It was chaos that had been tamed, ridden like a wild animal, and pointed in a direction. This tried to push deeper. She tried to find a crack, a weakness, a single quiet thought she could grab onto. The storm grabbed her instead. She was thrown out of her trance so hard that her body flew backward off her chair and hit the wall. Her nose bled. Her hand shook. 2 attendants rushed in and found her on the floor, staring at the ceiling, whispering the same words over and over. Every one of them. Every single one. They are all screaming with purpose. The Thyrene High Council was informed. They decided to say nothing publicly. Admitting that human minds were beyond their reach would destroy their reputation. The Orvani Trade Consortium tried a different approach. They sent a polished diplomatic shuttle to the Erebus, carrying their best negotiator, a smooth-talking amphibian named Gallus, who had brokered deals worth more than some planets. He brought gifts, trade proposals, and a contract that would give the Orvani exclusive trading rights with Earth, in exchange for galactic star maps and technology databases. The humans let him dock. They treated him with respect. They gave him a meal, and then they politely said no. Gallus was confused. Everyone wanted to trade. Everyone wanted technology. Everyone wanted an advantage. He offered better terms. The humans said no again. He offered even better terms. They smiled and said they were not interested in military or technological trade at this time, but they appreciated the offer. Gallus returned to his ship in a daze. In his report to the consortium, he noted something that troubled him. The humans spoke Galactic Common perfectly, but their use of language was extraordinarily complex. They used words with layers of meaning. They made jokes. They used something called sarcasm, which Gallus had to have explained to him 3 times before he understood it. These were not primitives. These were not simple creatures stumbling into the galactic stage. These people knew exactly what they were doing. The Dracul hegemony did not bother with diplomacy. They were warriors, and warriors measured threats in numbers. Warlord Cathol, the hegemony's chief strategist, ordered every scanner and sensor in the Dracul fleet pointed at the Erebus. For hours, they measured its energy output, its hull density, its thermal signature, its gravitational shadow. The results made Cathol feel sick. He sat in his command chamber and read the report 3 times, hoping he had made a mistake. He had not. The Erebus was outputting more energy than a small star. Its hull was made of materials that did not appear on any periodic table. Its defensive barrier, the thing that had erased the Velarth plasma bolt, operated on principles his best scientists could not even begin to understand. Keth Al was old. He had fought in 43 battles and won 41 of them. He had earned every scar on his massive armored body. And he knew, with the certainty of a lifetime spent studying war, that the ship floating outside could destroy every vessel in the region without effort. He wrote a classified report and sent it to Dracul High Command. His superiors read it and ordered it buried. In the hegemony, admitting that someone was stronger than you was the same as admitting defeat. The report disappeared into a locked archive. Meanwhile, Admiral Tovan was making noise. The Velarth commander was humiliated. His warning shot had been erased like it was nothing. He had been made to look weak in front of 4 other empires, and in Velareth culture, weakness was death. He stormed through the Fulcrum's corridors, cornering delegates, demanding action. The unknown ship was a threat. It had to be dealt with. If the empires worked together, they could overwhelm it with numbers. Most delegates ignored him, but some listened. In the middle of all this, the humans sent someone to the summit. Her name was Captain Ria Vasquez, and she arrived alone, wearing a simple black uniform with no medals and no decorations. She was average height, with dark hair pulled back tight, brown skin, and a long scar that ran from her left temple to her jaw. She walked into the main hall of the fulcrum, the way someone might walk into their own living room, calm, unhurried, and completely unafraid. She sat in the empty chair that had been placed for her, looked around at the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and smiled politely. The delegates questioned her for hours. Where was Earth? She could not share that information at this time. How large was the human fleet? That was classified. What did humans want? To observe, learn, and perhaps make friends. The Valarith delegate, a snarling officer named Dren, lost his temper. He stood up, towering over Vasquez, and told her that her species was trespassing in sovereign space. That the empires had crushed civilizations far more impressive than whatever backwater planet she had crawled out of. That if the humans did not leave, they would be removed. Vasquez looked up at him. She did not stand. She did not raise her voice. Admiral Torvan's species has been traveling between stars for 9,000 years, she said. Mine has been doing it for 300. Think carefully about what that says about how fast we learn. A few delegates shifted in their seats. Most dismissed her words as the bluffing of a cornered animal. That night, in a secure chamber deep inside the Valarith flagship, Admiral Torvan met with Warlord Kethel of the Dracul and High Seer Morith of the Thyrene. 3 empires, 3 fleets, over 400 warships combined. Torvan laid out his plan. A simultaneous strike from all directions. Overwhelm the human ship's defenses with sheer volume of fire. Capture it if possible. Destroy it if necessary. Divide the technology among the 3 empires. Cathal had read his own classified report. He knew this was a terrible idea, but his government had buried that report, and his orders were clear. Show strength. Do not back down. Morith, still stung by Vis's failure, wanted answers. Capturing the humans would give the Thyrene access to those impossible mines. They agreed. The strike would happen during the next summit session, when the humans would expect diplomacy, not war. The Urvani and the Shanri were invited to join. Both declined. The Urvani said the risk was too high. The Shanri said nothing at all, but quietly began moving their fleet further away from the Erebus, as far as they could go without leaving the region entirely. Nobody warned the humans. And aboard the Erebus, 10,000 human minds continued to burn like a storm that never ended. Aware of everything, afraid of nothing, and waiting. The attack was scheduled for the 3rd day of the summit, during the morning session. The plan was simple. While the delegates talked inside the fulcrum, the combined fleet of 3 empires would move into attack position around the Erebus. On Torvan's signal, they would fire everything they had. 412 warships began moving at dawn. The Valarith brought 160 assault carriers, fast and vicious, designed to overwhelm enemies with waves of fighters and close-range plasma fire. The Dracul brought 140 dreadnoughts, massive armored beasts covered in heavy weapons, each one capable of reducing a city to glass. The Thyrene brought 112 Psi cruisers, elegant ships that amplified the mental powers of their crews, turning thought itself into a weapon. Together, they formed the largest combined military force assembled in over 1,000 years. They spread out in a sphere around the Erebus, surrounding it from every direction, cutting off every possible escape route. Their weapons charged. Their shields went active. Their crews prepared for what they believed would be a difficult but winnable fight. Inside the fulcrum, the summit session began as usual. Delegates took their seats. Arguments resumed. The Urvani representative talked about tariffs, The Shanri representative said nothing, which was normal for the Shanri. Captain Ria Vasquez sat in her chair, listening politely. Then she stopped listening. Her hand went to her ear, where a small device sat against her skin. Someone was talking to her. Her expression did not change. She did not look surprised or angry or afraid. She simply stood up. Every eye in the room turned to her. She looked directly at the Valaris delegate, then at the Dracul delegate, then at the Thyrene delegate. She held each of their gazes for exactly 2 seconds. "Your fleets have powered their weapons," she said. Her voice was calm and even, the way someone might announce the weather. "I want you to know, we gave you every chance." She walked out of the hall. Her boots echoed on the metal floor. The door closed behind her. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then the Valaris delegate grabbed his communicator. The Dracul delegate did the same. They knew. She knew. The surprise was gone. But Tovan did not care about surprise. He had 400 warships. He gave the order. Fire. The galaxy had seen many battles. Wars had been fought across thousands of star systems over thousands of years. But nothing that had come before could compare to what happened in the space around the Erebus in the next 30 seconds. Every ship in the Trilateral Fleet fired at the same time. Plasma lances, superheated bolts of energy that could melt through a kilometer of rock. Kinetic slugs, chunks of dense metal accelerated to a fraction of light speed. Psi cannons, weapons that attacked not the body but the mind, designed to drive entire crews insane with a single burst. Singularity torpedoes, each one carrying a tiny artificial black hole that would tear apart anything it touched. The firepower directed at the Erebus in that first moment could have cracked open a moon. It was enough destruction to end civilizations. It was the combined rage of 3 empires, and it all converged on a single target. The Erebus did nothing. The energy barriers around its hull absorbed everything. Every bolt, every slug, every torpedo, every psi blast hit the barrier and disappeared. Not deflected, not reflected, absorbed. The barrier did not glow. It did not strain. It did not flicker. It simply ate the incoming fire the way an ocean swallows a stone, completely and without effort. For exactly 3 seconds, the Erebus sat there and took it. Every weapon in 3 fleets pounding away at it. And nothing happened. Then the Erebus responded. Later, when the battle was analyzed by military historians across the galaxy, they would struggle to describe what happened next. The words they used most often were precise, surgical, and terrifying. The Erebus did not fire beams. What it released were streams of light that did not travel in straight lines. They curved. They bent around obstacles. They split into smaller streams and chased individual targets. A Valarith carrier tried to dodge, turning hard to port, pushing its engines to maximum. The beam followed it, curving with it, matching every move, and then struck its weapon arrays with perfect accuracy. The plasma cannons exploded. The missile tubes melted shut. The engines died. But the hull held. Life support stayed active. The crew was alive. The Dracul dreadnoughts were built to take punishment. Their armor was the thickest in the galaxy, layered plates of compressed alloy that could survive a direct hit from a singularity torpedo. The Erebus did not bother with their armor. It fired projectiles that simply passed through the shields and the armor as if they were not there, as if they existed in some other layer of reality. The projectiles appeared inside the ships and detonated against weapon systems, engine cores, and shield generators. Internal explosions ripped through corridors, but only the corridors that contained military equipment. Crew quarters were untouched. Medical bays were untouched. The ships went dark and drifted, crippled but whole. The Thyrene Psi cruisers tried to fight with their minds. 100 telepaths linked together and threw a concentrated wave of psychic force at the Erebus, enough mental energy to reduce a normal crew to drooling vegetables. The wave hit the Erebus and bounced back. Not scattered, not absorbed, reflected. 100 Tyrene telepaths felt their own psychic attack slam back into them, and they collapsed screaming at their stations. Their ships, now crewless in every way that mattered, drifted silently. And through it all, the Erebus released pulses of electromagnetic energy that swept across the battlefield like invisible tides. Every ship they touched lost weapons. Cannons powered down. Missile systems went offline. Targeting computers crashed. But only weapons. Only offensive systems. Shields stayed up. Life support kept running. Navigation still worked. The pulse could tell the difference between a gun and a heater, and only killed the guns. 30 seconds. That was all it took. 412 warships from 3 galactic empires, the largest combined fleet in 1,000 years, hung dead in space. Not destroyed, not burning, just silent, drifting, dark, every weapon disabled, every engine cold, every offensive system reduced to scrap, and not a single being on any of those ships was dead. Admiral Torvan stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Wrath. The lights were emergency red. His tactical display was blank. His weapons officer was staring at empty screens. His communications officer was trying to reach anyone at all, and getting nothing but static. Torvan's hands were trembling. He clenched his fist to make them stop, but they would not. He had just thrown the combined might of 3 empires at a single ship, and that ship had swatted them aside like they were insects, like they were nothing. Aboard his dreadnought, Warlord Kethel sat in his command chair and listened to the silence. No explosions, no screaming, no alarms, just silence. He turned to his second-in-command, a younger Dracul officer whose face had gone pale gray. "Send the classified report to High Command," Kethel said quietly. "All of it. No more burying the truth." His second-in-command nodded and left without a word. And then the Erebus spoke. Its transmission went out on every frequency, to every ship, every station, every communication relay in the region. The same calm, steady voice that had introduced itself days ago. No anger, no triumph, no threat, just facts. This engagement is concluded. We have destroyed no vessels and taken no lives. We have no interest in your territories, your resources, or your wars. But understand this clearly. The next species that fires on a united Earth vessel will not receive the same restraint. Erebus out. The transmission ended. The Erebus went silent again, floating in the center of the wreckage of 3 broken fleets, untouched, unscratched, and completely still. On the fulcrum, the delegates sat in their chairs and said nothing. The Shanri representative, who had been quiet throughout the entire summit, turned to the Orvani representative and spoke for the first time. "They chose not to kill," the Shanri said. "That is the most frightening thing of all." The Orvani representative nodded slowly. Because the Shanri was right. Any empire could destroy. Any fleet could kill. But choosing not to, having the power to erase 400 ships and every soul aboard them, and instead choosing to simply turn off the lights, that required a kind of strength that none of them had ever seen before. The kind of strength that made you wonder what would happen if they ever stopped being gentle Dodd. The battle lasted 30 seconds. The political earthquake it caused lasted much longer. Within hours of the engagement, the Trilateral Pact collapsed. Torvan, Kethal, and Morath had agreed to share the victory. Nobody had planned for sharing the humiliation. The 3 empires turned on each other immediately, each one blaming the others for the failure. The Velarith Dominion moved first. Admiral Torvan was arrested by his own officers before his flagship's emergency power was even fully restored. The Dominion's military council needed someone to blame, and Torvan had been the loudest voice calling for the attack. He was stripped of his rank, removed from command, and transported back to Valar space in chains. His trial would be quick and public. The Dominion did not forgive weakness, and right now, the entire species felt weak. The Dracul hegemony handled things differently because the Dracul were different. They were the oldest spacefaring civilization among the 5 empires. They had been warriors for longer than some species had existed. Their entire culture, their religion, their art, their laws, everything was built on the idea that strength was the highest virtue, and that the Dracul were the strongest beings in the galaxy. And now they knew that was not true. Warlord Kethel's classified report finally reached high command, and this time it could not be buried. The numbers were too clear. The evidence was too strong. A single human ship had disabled their entire forward fleet without suffering a scratch, without taking a life, without even seeming to try very hard. The Dracul had not just lost a battle. They had discovered that their entire understanding of power was wrong. Kethel expected to be punished for his part in the failed attack. Instead, he received a private message from the hegemony's ruling council. They wanted to know everything he had learned about the humans. Not their weapons. Not their technology. They wanted to know how a species that was only 300 years into space travel had surpassed civilizations that had been flying for 9,000. The Thyran ascendancy was falling apart in a quieter, more personal way. Mindlord Vis had partially recovered from her first attempt to scan the Erebus, but the battle had broken something else inside her. During the engagement, when the Thyrene Psi cruisers had attacked and been repelled, Vis had been linked to the network. She had felt the reflection. She had experienced the full force of 100 Tyrene minds slamming back into themselves. But in that moment of contact, she had seen deeper into the human minds than before. She requested a meeting with the Thyrene High Council and told them what she had found. "We have always believed that mental order is the path to power," Vis said. Her voice was still shaking. "Our minds are clean, structured, disciplined. We suppress emotion to achieve clarity. That is how we control psionics. That is how we dominate other species." She paused and took a breath. The humans do the opposite. Their minds are filled with emotion. Not one emotion. All of them. At the same time. Rage and love and grief and hope and fear and joy, all crashing together like waves in a storm. By our standards, they should be insane. They should be broken. But they are not. They have learned to ride the storm. They use the chaos as fuel. Every human mind I touched was a hurricane with a pilot sitting in the center, steering it. She looked at the council members, each of them masters of mental discipline. Each of them proud of their controlled, orderly thoughts. "We are candles," Vis said. "They are wildfires. And they have learned to aim." The council said nothing for a long time. While the 3 attacking empires dealt with their internal crises, the other 2 made very different choices. The Orvani Trade Consortium, true to their nature, sent another delegation to the Erebus. This time they did not come with contracts and deals. They came with an honest question. What would the humans accept? The answer surprised them. The humans were willing to exchange cultural information, art, music, literature, and history. They would share knowledge about their homeworld and their species. But they would not trade weapons. They would not trade military technology. They would not sell the secrets of their ship. The Irvani could not understand this. In their world, everything had a price. The idea that someone would willingly sit on the most valuable technology in the galaxy and refuse to sell it was beyond their understanding. The Shanri Collective did something unexpected. They sent a single small drone to the Erebus. The drone carried no weapons, no scanners, no surveillance equipment. It carried a data core containing the complete cultural archive of the Shanri species. Every song their hive queens had ever composed. Every memory their collective had ever preserved. Every piece of art, every historical record, every scientific discovery, freely given with no conditions. It was a gesture of pure respect. The Shanri had watched everything. They had calculated the odds before the battle and moved their fleet away because they already knew what would happen. They were the first species in the galaxy to understand that the humans were not a threat to be measured, but a neighbor to be welcomed. The humans accepted the gift and gave one in return. A curated archive of Earth's history, art, music, and literature. The Shanri Hive Queens spent 3 days processing human music. When they were done, they created a new word for it in their language. They called it organized emotion, and they declared it one of the most beautiful things they had ever experienced. 1 week after the battle, Captain Vasquez held what the humans called a press conference aboard the Fulcrum. Representatives from all 5 empires attended. The room was full. The air was tense. Everyone wanted answers. Vasquez stood at the front of the room and gave them some. She told them about Earth. She described a planet that made the delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. Earth was what the galactic community called a death world, a planet so hostile that most species would classify it as uninhabitable. High gravity, an atmosphere full of a corrosive gas called oxygen. Extreme temperature swings. Earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions. An ecosystem filled with predators, parasites, and diseases. Mass extinction events that had wiped out most life on the planet not once, not twice, but 5 times. And humans had evolved there, not as the top predators. Humans were not the fastest, not the strongest, not the toughest creatures on their own world. They survived by being persistent. They were pursuit predators. They chased their prey on foot, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. They could not outrun anything. They simply never stopped. She told them about humanity's 300 years in space. They had received no help. No galactic community had welcomed them. No elder species had given them star maps or taught them how to build warp drives. They had figured out everything on their own, from scratch, through trial and error and stubbornness. They had nearly destroyed their own planet before they left it. They had fought terrible wars among themselves. They had stumbled and fallen and gotten back up again and again. And then she told them the thing that changed everything. The Erebus is not a warship, Vasquez said. It is a deep space exploration vessel, a scout ship. It was designed for long-range observation and first contact. The weapons it carries are defensive systems, included as a precaution for encounters with hostile wildlife or environmental hazards. The room went very still. The Erebus is not the strongest ship in the United Earth Navy, Vasquez continued. It is not the fastest. It is not the most heavily armed. It is an explorer. It was sent ahead of our main fleet to see what was out there. A Dracul delegate spoke from the back of the room. His voice was hoarse. If this is a scout, what does a warship look like? Vasquez looked at him for a long moment. You do not want to find out, she said simply. In every intelligence office in every empire, the same thought occurred at the same time. The most devastating display of military power any of them had ever witnessed had been performed by a ship that was not even designed for combat. A scout, an explorer. A ship built for looking at things, not for fighting them. If that was what an explorer could do, what was the human navy actually capable of? Nobody wanted to answer that question, but everybody was asking it. 3 months passed, and the galaxy did not go back to normal. It could not. Normal had been destroyed the moment the Erebus came through that rift in space. And what was growing in its place was something nobody had expected. The contested Veil, once the most dangerous border region in the galaxy, had become the quietest. The Erebus remained exactly where it had stopped on that first day, floating in the center of the region like a dark and silent moon. It did nothing. It threatened no one. It asked for nothing. It just sat there. And its presence alone had ended centuries of border skirmishes, because no empire was foolish enough to start a fight within sensor range of a human ship. The 5 empires sent ambassadors to Earth. The journey required the humans to share a set of coordinates, which they did carefully and reluctantly, along with strict navigation routes and clear warnings about the consequences of bringing warships. The ambassadors traveled for weeks through unmapped space and arrived at a solar system that their star charts said should be empty. It was not empty. Earth floated in the habitable zone of a medium-sized yellow star, blue and green and white, a planet so beautiful and so violent that the ambassadors could not stop staring at it. They could see storms from orbit, massive swirling systems of cloud and lightning that covered entire continents. They could see the scars of tectonic activity, mountain ranges pushed up by the slow collision of enormous plates of rock. They could see oceans that covered most of the surface, deep and dark and hiding things that even the humans had not fully cataloged. And in orbit around this death world, they saw the fleet. The ambassadors had been told that the Erebus was a scout ship. They had believed it in theory. Seeing the truth was different. The United Earth Navy filled the space around Earth like a wall of silent black muddle. Ships of every size, from small patrol craft to vessels that made the Erebus look modest. And at the center, docked at a massive orbital station, sat something so large that the Valarth ambassador had to sit down when he saw it. It was not a ship. It was a mobile fortress, a vessel so enormous that it had its own gravitational pull, bristling with systems and structures that the ambassador's instruments could not even identify. Nobody asked what it was for. Nobody wanted to know. The human ambassadors who came to the galactic stage were not what anyone expected. The empires were used to diplomats who played games. Every galactic culture had developed the same approach to politics over thousands of years. You said one thing and meant another. You smiled while plotting. You made promises you intended to break. It was the way things were done. The humans did not do any of that. They said what they meant. They meant what they said. When they made a promise, they kept it. When they disagreed with something, they said so directly, without insult but without deception. It was so unusual that most galactic diplomats did not know how to respond. You could not outmaneuver someone who was not trying to maneuver you. You could not find hidden meanings in words that had no hidden meanings. It was, in its own way, the most disarming weapon the humans possessed. The Dracul hegemony was changing. The old guard, the warriors who had built their lives on the idea that conquest was the only path to honor, were losing ground. A new generation had grown up hearing the story of the battle at the contested Veil. They had heard how the humans had won without killing. They had heard how a species that was only 3 centuries old had surpassed every military in the galaxy, not through cruelty or aggression, but through relentless creativity and adaptation. Warlord Kethel became the voice of this new movement. He had been there. He had felt his ship go dark. He had sat in the silence of his defeated bridge and understood something that most Dracul were only now beginning to accept. True strength was not the ability to destroy. True strength was the ability to choose not to destroy, even when you could. He traveled to the Erebus personally to request a cultural exchange with the humans. When he arrived, he was met by Captain Vasquez, who took him on a tour of the ship. He saw things he would never forget. He saw humans training in a combat gymnasium, fighting each other with a ferocity that would have impressed any Dracul warrior. He saw the same humans an hour later sitting together and laughing and sharing food. He saw a crew member playing a musical instrument with tears running down her face, and when he asked what was wrong, she said she was not sad. She was playing a song that reminded her of home. He asked Vasquez how humans could contain so much contradiction. How could they be warriors and poets at the same time? How could they cry and fight and laugh and grieve all within the same hour? Vasquez thought about it for a moment and then said, because we don't see those things as contradictions. They are all part of being alive. We fight because we love what we are fighting for. We cry because we have lost things worth crying about. We laugh because if we did not laugh, the weight of everything else would crush us. Catho returned to the hegemony and began the hard work of reshaping his culture. It would take years, maybe generations, but it had started. The Valarith Dominion was not adapting as gracefully. Tovan's arrest and trial had exposed cracks in the Dominion's authority that had been growing for centuries. The Valarith had conquered dozens of smaller species over the millennia, keeping them as subject races, cheap labor, and cannon fodder. These subject races had always been too afraid to resist. But the humans had changed the math. If one ship from an unknown species could humble 3 empires, then the empires were not invincible. And if the empires were not invincible, then maybe, just maybe, the conquered did not have to stay conquered. Rebellions began on Valarith vassal worlds. Small at first, protests, strikes, refusals to work. The Dominion cracked down hard, but for every uprising they crushed, 2 more appeared. The subject races were not asking for human help. They did not need to. The humans had already given them the most powerful weapon of all, proof that the mighty could fall. The Thyrene Ascendancy sent a formal scientific delegation to study human neurology. What they found reshaped their understanding of consciousness itself. Human brains were, by galactic standards, a mess. They were redundant, chaotic, and inefficient. They processed information through tangled networks of neurons that fired in patterns that looked random to Thyrene instruments. By every measure the Thyrene used, the human brain should not have produced intelligent thought. But it did. And the chaos was the reason why. Because human brains were not optimized for any single function, they could adapt to almost anything. They could rewire themselves in response to injury, trauma, or new information. They could hold contradictory ideas simultaneously and use the tension between them to generate new solutions. They were creative in a way that no orderly, disciplined Thyrene mind could match. The Thyrene scientists coined a term for humans that spread across the galaxy within weeks. They called them beautiful disasters. The biggest change, however, did not come from the 5 empires. It came from below. Across the galaxy, there were hundreds of smaller species. Races that had been conquered, ignored, exploited, or simply overlooked by the 5 great powers. They had no voice. They had no seat at any table. They existed in the margins of galactic civilization, and nobody cared what they thought. The humans cared. Earth's ambassadors did something that no galactic power had ever done. They talked to the small species. They listened. They asked questions and paid attention to the answers. And when the small species asked if there could be a place where everyone had a voice, not just the powerful, the humans said yes. A proposal was made to create a galactic council. Not a council of empires, but a council of species. Every species would have a seat. Every voice would be heard. The 5 empires resisted, of course. Sharing power was not something they did willingly. But the Erebus was still floating in the contested veil, and the human fleet was still orbiting Earth. And everyone knew that when the humans suggested something, it was wise to take the suggestion seriously. The fulcrum was chosen as the council's meeting place. Delegations began arriving from across the galaxy. Species that had never spoken to each other sat in the same room for the first time. It was messy and loud and confused, and it was the most hopeful thing the galaxy had seen in 10,000 years. On the day the first session of the Galactic Council was called to order, Captain Ria Vasquez stood on the observation deck of the Erebus and watched. Through the viewport, she could see the fulcrum. Shuttles from dozens of species were docking at the station, a constant stream of small ships carrying representatives from worlds that had never had a voice before. Among them, she saw a Shanri drone and a Dracul shuttle arriving at the same docking bay at the same time. They waited for each other. They let each other pass. A small thing, an impossible thing, 3 months ago. Her first officer, a tall, quiet man named Torres, came to stand beside her. He watched the shuttles for a while, then spoke. "Do you think they will ever stop being afraid of us?" Vasquez considered the question. She watched the shuttles come and go. She watched old enemies share the same corridor without violence. She watched the beginning of something new and fragile and uncertain. "Maybe," she said. "But fear is not the worst foundation for peace. It got them to the table. What they build there is up to them." She paused, and her expression softened. The scar on her face caught the light from a distant star. "Besides," she said, "we did not come out here to be feared. We came out here because we were lonely." Torres looked at her. She looked at the galaxy. Somewhere out there, 5 empires were rethinking everything they believed. Conquered species were standing up for the first time. Ancient warriors were learning that there was more to strength than the ability to kill. Telepaths were discovering that the messiest minds in the galaxy were also the most extraordinary. And traders were learning that some things were more valuable than profit. All because one ship had appeared from nowhere, refused to be intimidated, chosen mercy over massacre, and then asked the simplest question any species had ever asked. So, what has everyone else been up to? The galaxy would never be the same. Not because humanity had conquered it. Not because humanity had demanded it. But because humanity had shown up, extended a hand, and waited to see who would take it. And slowly, one by one, they did.